Welcome to the Red Sneaker Writers Podcast. News, interviews, and writing tips for people who are serious about having a writing career and want some practical knowledge to help them achieve it. Your host is the nationally best-selling author of more than 50 books, William Bernhardt.
Hey, hello sneakers. Welcome to our very special Independence Week episode of the podcast. I'm saying Independence Week, taking some liberties, but as we record this, it's coming after the 4th, and the audio podcast will go out on Sunday, so it'll be several days after. So I'm just making it Independence Week. Why not? Which comes on the heels of Father's Day, my favorite for obvious reasons. All the kids came together, and we had Alice made her tortilla soup. We played games, and in 2 days, I'm leaving for Eureka Springs for a small group writing retreat. Come to think of it, I met one of our two interview guests today for the first time many years ago in Eureka Springs at their annual literary conference, which is called Books in Bloom. That's when I discovered the Writers' Colony at Derry Hollow and then started hosting retreats there. Well, anyway, in honor of the stellar talent that we have with us today on the podcast, not one but two sensational best-selling authors, I'm foregoing the usual news segment. In truth, there's not a whole lot of news happening this week, and I want to leave as much time as possible for our guests. But the one thing that I will never forego is my super special sound engineer, Jesse Ulrich. Jesse, how are you celebrating this holiday week? I just decided.
Well, every July 4th, as a former historian, I like to point out that we really should be celebrating this on July 2nd and not the 4th anyway. But
you and John Adams.
Yep. Yeah, I'm a big John Adams fan. And mostly I had one of the chillest 4th of Julys I've had in quite some time. We were just in a friend's backyard watching a Captain America marathon that was on FX, I think.
On your 65-inch television?
No, he had a TV outside. So, yeah, it was not as nice as watching it on my new TV. I will say, those lights I told you about that change depending on what's on the screen, I was watching the 4K Lord of the Rings that I recently bought, and every time the ring is either mentioned or shown, the lights turn red, which I thought was a really nice touch. So that was fun.
Sounds cool. So this is the first time since we started live streaming these podcasts that we've had two guests at once. Do you think you're up to the challenge?
Listen. I will do the best with what I am given in all situations. So no matter what, people watching out there live now or listening to it a week from now, they're going to hear something amazing.
I agree with that. Before we bring on our guests, let me remind everyone that we are, of course, still accepting registrations for WriterCon, which is our annual writers conference every year in Oklahoma City. Takes place over Labor Day weekend. That's September 3rd through 6th this year. There's the logo Jesse's got up on the screen. Hey, Labor Day weekend is closer than you might think. I was kind of shocked when I looked at the calendar today and saw that we're only about 7 weeks away. And I normally spend pretty much all of August prepping the conference. So I need to get this book I'm writing finished really soon. Anyway, back to WriterCon. You can come to WriterCon in person, or you can stream the whole thing from home. We have over 60 presenters, writers, agents, publishers, editors, and much more attending. You can pitch. You can meet with people informally. You can have lunch with speakers, enter contests, and on and on and on. Our keynote speaker this year is David Farland, possibly the best writing instructor ever, other than Gary Braver, but more about that in just a minute. The program covers both fundamentals and all the latest things you need to know to break into or survive the modern publishing world. So please check it out. Visit writercon.org. That's WRITERCON.org. And see if this might be the perfect thing to take your writing career to the next level. So today I have the great privilege of interviewing two authors. I know both, I read both, and I think both are among the very best writers working today. Tess Gerritsen, of course, has been writing spine-tingling thrillers since, I believe, 1987. She consistently hits the top of the bestseller lists. Her series of novels featuring homicide detective Jane Rizzoli and medical examiner Mara Isles inspired the TV series Rizzoli and Isles. She's a medical doctor. I'm talking about Tess now, not the fictional characters. She's a medical doctor, though I guess now retired and writing full time. But for her most recent book, Choose Me, she collaborated with another terrific author, Gary Braver, a great guy and great author with numerous award-winning thrillers and other books as well. He's also a professor teaching writing and many other things at Northwestern, where students fight to get into one of his acclaimed classes. The new novel these two have written, Choose Me, was released last Thursday, debuting in the #1 bestseller spot everywhere, where it still is. I checked this morning, and I think that means they've probably sold a copy or two of this wonderful book. Tess, Gary, are you with me? Come
Here.
join the podcast. Hey guys, how you doing?
Good.
Great.
Hi, Bill.
Good to see both of you.
Great.
All right, our traditional first question here on the podcast. I will start with Tess because it's a Brady Bunch type thing, and Tess is on top right now. So anyway, Tess, if you could offer a writer one, and you could probably offer 20, but if you had to narrow it down to one piece of advice you were going to give this person, what would it be?
Before you start writing your story, listen for the voice of your narrator, your main character, because that voice is going to tell the story. And once you can hear it, whether it's a he or a she, young or old, it will help you tell that story.
But how do you find that voice? I know what people are wondering. That sounds great, but where do I find it?
Well, you conjure it up in your head. It's just really sometimes, and maybe you need an imagination, or maybe you just need you just need to like let the universe come to you. But some of my best books, I think, started off with hearing a voice talking to me, whether it was a child's voice, or it was a scared woman's voice, or it was a killer's voice.
All right, Gary, same question for you. One piece of writing advice. What's it going to be?
Read the novels of those people you want to write like, you want to grow up to be like. Read very closely, study them, study the economy of creating characters, study how they get in and out of scenes, study the cliffhanger endings of chapters that keep pages turning and keep the readers wanting more. And just how a narrative trust is created in the narrative. I mean, and this means looking at it the way a carpenter looks at a house, very closely. Don't speed read. Just really study the various strategies to keep you turning the pages.
Yeah, also great advice. Well, of course, I want to talk to both of you about this new book, Choose Me. But before we get there, I'd like to talk a little bit about how you got into this business and your path, because I know many of the people who are watching now or will listen later to this will be interested in how it happened. So Tess, I'm going to start with you because you are really making me look bad. My parents wanted me to be a doctor, and I said, no, I'm going to be a writer. But you did both. How did that happen?
Well, the difference was I listened to my parents. I wanted to be a writer when I was 7, and my dad said, oh, that's no way to make a living. You better go into medicine. So I followed I was a good girl, and I went to medical school, and I liked medicine, but I've always been a writer. And it was, I wrote all the way through medical school. And even in those long nights on call, if I had an extra hour or something, I would scratch out something. So I got my big break when I went on maternity leave. I gave birth to my first son. He was a great sleeper. He would sleep for 2 to 3 hours at a time. And that's when I started writing in earnest. So I wrote my first novel on maternity leave. I always tell my sons, I'm going to give you some credit, kids, for sleeping so well. And I think it was maybe my 3rd novel that I sold. There's always 2 practice novels, right? And those get stuck in the closet. And the 3rd one went to Harlequin. And so I did, I started off in romantic suspense, and I've been switching genres ever since.
Right. So at this time in life, when most people are just sleep deprived and and complaining about how tired they are, you're writing your first novel. That's really kind of incredible.
Well, after working 80 to 100 hours a week as a medical doctor, being at home with a kid who slept a lot wasn't bad.
Right. Hey, I got to say, because I was spying on you on Amazon today, some of those early romance novels still available.
They're all available. That is one of the, it's really funny. It's one of the, I guess, the benefits of the digital world is that books never really go out of print. So you can keep selling them, even if you're embarrassed by them.
Right. Or even if you'd like to get the rights back, but that's never going to happen because they're not going out of print.
Right.
Gary, how about you? How'd you get into writing?
I had two scientists, uncles, and they influenced me to go to Worcester Polytechnic Institute. I studied physics. Around my sophomore year, I had a course in advanced thermodynamics and said, I don't want to grow up to be a physicist. And I was writing at the time. I was an editor of the newspaper and the yearbook, and I started a humor magazine. And words came to me much more quickly. I understood them than atomic particles. So I got an equivalent to an English degree and went to graduate school a couple of times. And I wanted to write. And the only way to learn how to write is learn how to read. And the only way to learn how to read is to learn how to teach books to students. So I got a job at Northeastern, not Northwestern, Northeastern University. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. People often confuse those. And my office mate was Robert B. Parker.
Wow.
And is the closest friend for the 40 years. But I watched him write his first four or five Spencer novels, and he was a desperate here, and he demythologized the process. He wrote 5 pages a day, and at the end of the year, he had a book. He sent it off over the transom. He got it published. He got an agent, and I got my first agent through him. So it was just watching him become the writer he became, and I followed that. I pursued that once I had a storyline and wrote my first novel way back. Yeah.
Wow. Both of you have kind of extraordinary stories. Robert Parker, although I want to make sure everybody listening to this picked up on this. Your undergraduate degree was in physics, right?
Undergraduate was in physics, right? Yeah.
I mean,
I worked as a physicist for 3 years too while I was going to school. But I just knew, and it was very exotic stuff. But I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in a lab. I wanted to write. Yeah.
I mean, most writers I know have trouble rebooting their computers, and you've got a degree in physics. And then the others were in English and writing and literature, right?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about your writing process. You just mentioned 5 pages a day, and I think Tess referenced this too. Tess, what's your writing life look like? I mean, 5 pages a day, or what are you doing?
It's changed a lot over the years because now that I'm older and I don't have the fire in the belly to turn in a book every year, I decided that it was time to stop and smell the roses. So I don't sign contracts ahead of time. I just write the book and I turn it in when it's ready.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, that's really changed. So I don't have deadlines. And the funny thing is, despite the fact I have no deadlines, I'm writing as fast as I ever did. So it's more of a psychological burden that's off my shoulders. And my process is I don't outline. I hear a character. I want to follow that character. And I just start writing and I see where she takes me.
Okay. Once again, you're just kind of flabbergasting me here. You don't outline. I mean, I associate you with these twisty, really pretty plot. There's a lot of story here and twists and turns, and none of that's planned in advance.
Always happens on the fly. The best twists are the ones where it just comes out of left field and you go, whoa, I didn't see that happening. Because if it surprises me, it surprises the reader. And I think that if I see the twist on the page beforehand, somehow when I get to that, I'm just not as excited to write about that twist.
Interesting.
So it's all, my first drafts, of course, are horrible. They're a mishmash of, I went down this blind alley and that blind alley. But by the time you finish the first draft, you know what the story is about, and you make it all hang together in the second, third, and fourth drafts. That's all.
That's what I mean. I've had situations where I thought, okay, this story's a little slow. What's the most unexpected thing that could happen right now? And then I have it happen, but then I have to go back and spend like a week rewriting the first part. So that makes the vaguest sort of sense. And I think, well, that's what happens when you don't plan ahead, Bill. But this is your whole approach, right?
I love that approach because I love being surprised by myself. And the other thing that I should say, this was like my second. If you'd asked me for a second writer's tip, I would have said this one.
Okay.
Don't stop to revise. Just keep going. Just leave put a sticky note and say, I've got to go fix this part. Let's just keep going. Because I can't wait to get to the end of the first draft. And then I know what the story's about. So if I were to stop and revise, I'd be revising the first 5 chapters for months, and I'd never get any far. So I just keep on leaping ahead and just leaving stickies everywhere. Fix this, fix that, go back to it later.
Now, I do understand and appreciate that one. I would never finish a first draft either. And the other benefit of that, I've found anyway, is that the whole time I'm writing the first draft, I think, this is terrible. This is so bad. And then when I actually go back and read it, it's, while not great, it's not as bad as I imagined it was at the time.
Well, actually, but the first time I go back to look at it, it always is as bad as I imagined it the first time. I can't remember which author it was that compared his first draft to a deformed baby. And he said every day he wakes up and that deformed baby is standing at the foot of his bed, haunting him. And that's how he sees that first draft. It just needs a lot of work.
Right. Well, Gary, how about you? What's your writing day look like?
I do outline. It's a little bit different tack than Tess has. I do make a vague outline, so I get some kind of direction, get a skeleton that put some flesh on. And unlike Tess, I polish my previous chapters because someplace down in chapter 27, I'm stuck. And the more I polish some of the earlier chapters, the more I'm able to work out the dilemmas I have later on. Right. And that is oftentimes an exercise in confidence too. If I can really buff the earlier chapters and feel good about it, something kind of magical happens, and I untie the Gordian knot later on. I am 2/3 through a novel now, and 2 days ago I decided who the villain is, who the killer is, and I was up against, the rule of thumb is always take the least suspicious character of all your characters, and another one is take the most suspicious character, dismiss that suspicion, try to put fingers on other people, and come back to the original. Do you remember the very popular show, The Undoing, with Nicole Kidman and Hugh Grant? I think a 6 or 7 parts.
Mm-hmm.
It starts off with Hugh Grant says, I didn't do it, and then they go down the line with all these other characters. At the end, he did it. And that is an interesting strategy that I'm in process of toying with right now. So after I've gotten my knot untied, I go to the end, and then I do a final polish. Yeah.
I would worry that people would think, well, that's who they said it was all along, and feel kind of disappointed. I want the big Agatha Christie, I never saw that coming moment.
Yeah, right.
The trouble with Agatha Christie's I never saw that moment is it's very unfair a lot of the time.
Yeah.
She pulls stuff out of the hat at the end, and there's no way to really solve some of these Miss Marple crimes.
Right.
Except by thinking, as I think Christie often did, what would be the one thing nobody has even considered a possibility, and then making it happen.
And that was the murder on the Orient Express. They all did it.
Right. Everybody, right.
That was brilliant, actually.
Which either it was brilliant or you feel sort of cheated because, well, whichever one you picked was right. It was just there were 10 other people as well, right?
Right.
And the other thing is, I think that readers think they read these books because they want to solve the puzzle. Mm-hmm. They want to find the killer. But that's not really why they read the book. I mean, if they wanted to solve a puzzle, they would just get out the New York Times crossword puzzle. Right. They're really reading it to find out who are these people and what moves them, and they're trying to find an emotional connection to characters. And it turns out that the puzzle is the least important part of the whole book.
It's another way of saying the detective is more interesting than the detection itself.
Yeah.
Should be. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Even, and I enjoy a good puzzle, but the one I'm going to remember most fondly isn't the one I figured out. It's going to be the one that completely fooled me, or the one that I never saw coming, or the one that had the most memorable character. So now I'm looking at two people. One says she doesn't outline, one says he does, and somehow you managed to collaborate and produce a novel. I guess, Gary, there was an outline, but only you got to look at it, or how, who wants to start? Tell me, where did this book come from?
Tess, you can take that.
Okay, well, I'll just tell you where the concept came from.
Okay.
We were at a Christmas party. I mean, I've known Gary for decades, and we were at a Christmas party in Boston at a bookstore, and I was following the Me Too movement and thinking about every story really is all about point of view. Wouldn't it be interesting to tell a Me Too kind of story, but in the sort of the gray zone, from both the male and the female point of view? What if there's an illicit affair? And what if maybe the man shouldn't be, well, neither one of them should be doing it, but what if the man is really trespassing? How would he look at it? And how would the female look at it? And wouldn't it be fun to write a story like that where we actually split up the points of view? And Gary said, yeah, let's do it. So he wrote the first chapter, sent it to me. I wrote the next chapter. And we were going on this basic assumption that the young woman is going to die. We knew that already. Okay, so that was part of the future outline. We knew she was going to be killed, and that it was going to be murder. We just didn't know who did it yet. And so the story proceeded from there. We wrote it chronologically, starting off with the beginning of the affair, how it goes really badly, how she ends up dead, and then the cop comes in. And so that was the first draft. But I think we were feeling our way through a lot of that, Gary. We were just, the characters were revealing themselves as we were writing the story.
Right. And even though this is a murder mystery, as Tess suggested, this really is a novel of character. We have two complicated characters that we wanted to nuance. We didn't want to make either one villainous. We didn't want to make Taryn a hot temptress. We didn't want to make Jack a wanton Lothario, womanizer. And so the having to determine what the motivations were just added layers, nuances to the characters. And we really enjoyed that. I mean, we enjoyed the characters taking on flesh. And the most gratifying reviews we've gotten are those that said, this is very realistic characters, that these are portraits in gray, not black and white. That's what we did.
You're making it sound sort of like the anti-Gone Girl. But of course, that's not taking anything away from the book that obviously sold well. But some people did find the characters maybe one-dimensional, and you're trying to take that two character, can you believe any of them thing, and maybe flesh it out with people who you can relate to or recognize.
Well, I think the scary thing is that we can relate to some of these characters. We can relate to the worst aspects of them. Because since I wrote from the point of view of the young woman who's, she's the kind of woman maybe some of us know, but never should stay away from. Obsessive, a stalking kind of girl who doesn't know how to take no for an answer when her boyfriend breaks up with her. We know people like that.
Right.
So she was fun to write, but I think Jack was a harder nut to crack. Right. And I think that Gary had a much, much more difficult job because he had to make Jack, who had done something bad, he had to make him likable. He had to make him relatable. And Gary knew just how to do it.
Mm. Well, it worked out beautifully. I finished the book in about 2 days, found it to be an absolute page turner. And I also read a lot of fabulous reviews this morning, and I saw your Amazon ranking. So I think you're doing this must have turned out, to be everything you want it to be and then some. So am I right in that you just went through this first draft, alternating chapters back and forth and no big plan? And then what about the second draft? Do you get to revise tests later in the game or third
Then
draft?
it got sticky. Well, look, first of all, that first draft was not, you make it sound like it was carefree. No, we didn't know who the killer was.
Right.
We were like 2/3 of the way through before we finally agreed on the killer, because there were several possibilities. But what happened was, because we wrote it chronologically, our wonderful editor, Gracie Doyle, looked at it and she said, I really like this detective, Detective Frankie Loomis, she comes in 2/3 of the way through the story. So the editor said, can't we see her sooner? We would really like to see her sooner. Well, how do you bring in a detective when the murder doesn't take place until halfway through the story? So what I chose to do was move the murder up to the very first scene. And a lot of it is flashback. So we see that Taryn is dead, but then we go back to see how we got to this horrible point. And Gary's probably tired of hearing me say this, but it's like coming across a train wreck, and you want to know how that train got wrecked. So you go back and look at what happened, everything that led up to this wreck. And then at a certain point in the book, then you watch the rest of the story.
Well, turned out very well. So manuscripts, or you wouldn't actually exchange paper, but electronic files going back and forth until everyone's satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Maybe the editor was satisfied.
Right.
Well, that brings up another issue. Was there any resistance from the publishing world? Tess, you said you don't do contracts in advance anymore. Was that the same for this book?
I didn't. Yeah, this was written on spec. We finished it, and because it was a collaboration, my usual publisher didn't know what to do with it. So they were reluctant, and that's why we ended up going to Thomas and Mercer, because they were willing to try something new and different.
I bet they were very glad to have both of you on the list, but of course they're doing a lot of great deals these days.
Right. They are. We've been very impressed.
So what do you think? More collaborations maybe, or some of these, well, who could return? Anyway, more collaborations in the future? I won't even speak to that because I don't want to spoil anything.
Probably not. I mean, Tess has several irons in the fire. I have a few irons in the fire. And so I think we're going to probably, this will be a one of. It was greatly satisfying. We are both very proud of this book. But even though people are clamoring to see more of Frankie Loomis, probably not in this collaboration.
Yeah. It was. We learned a lot from each other too. I think again, just not only about female versus male point of view, but I think we learned how collaborations are really. It's very. I like to liken it to trying to build a space station in space while you're both building your elements on Earth. And what happens is that you send them both up and you find that the one has measured everything in millimeters and the other one has measured everything in inches. And it doesn't quite get together. So we had to get through that meshing this complicated machinery together, changing the time element. And it ended up being I feel like a Swiss watchmaker now.
Really putting all the pieces together.
Right.
I mean, I'll tell you, I've published 55 books at this point, but I cannot even conceive of a collaboration. I think I'm way too much of a control freak to.
Most of us are.
I mean, what?
Most novelists are. We are.
Yeah.
We like to
I
be.
want it my way. So how do you work with somebody else? Where there are times when you just now I'm trying to get the dirt, obviously. Were there the times when you just had to bite your tongue and say, "I'll live with it," or
it comes from a writer who knows her audience, and Tess knows her readership, 80-something% female. And so you have to be psyche sensitive to the female point of view, and we're receiving a book. So some of the stuff that I had written, maybe some kind of husband-wife jokes that were of a slightly racy nature, it probably ended up on the cutting room floor because I think, it's perceived as being a little bit too much. Our style is a little different. You can tell from just talking to Tess, she is very precise, very concise. I have a tendency to telescope the moment and have my main character ruminate on the moment and consequences, and So I think our styles were a little bit different, but I deferred to her, and when she said, I think we should either shorten or lengthen the scenes, I responded, and she did the final edit and just kind of bucked the stone so that it looked like one author with at least two separate voices.
I think that what helps is that you have to respect each other as writers in a way, or at least realize you're dealing with a professional, and when there is a difference of opinion, we have to always think about the audience, and I think that was probably the point that was most contentious, was would a woman read that chapter and get ticked off? And we did not want to tick off our female readers, because we knew they were 80% female. So that I had to tone down some of the jackisms, I guess I could say. some of the guy point of view that I would have been offended hearing as a reader. So I think that was about it. It was mainly about whether or not we would upset our readership.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like a fascinating thing to do, and challenging too. Of course, here's my brilliant segue. You two have both tackled challenging subjects in the past. Gary, this is my way of leading to talking about tunnel vision, one of your previous books, which I adore, which kind of addresses the issue of the afterlife, and among other people was praised by many people, among them Ray Bradbury, who you can't see it, but my picture of Bradbury is right there. If I'd gotten that review, I probably would have. I would have just stopped, because it would never get any better than that. Anyway, tell me about tunnel vision. How did the idea for tackling this come about?
I was at a cocktail, but great things happen at cocktail parties.
Apparently,
I was at a cocktail
I need to get
party.
out more.
And a woman said that she had a near-death experience. She is Jewish. She had a near-death experience and had died and woke up in a place where Jesus was standing. This is the iconic, Renaissance images of Jesus. And she had lost her baby and wanted to die in real life. And Jesus told her, go back to life. You have one other child who depends on its mother. And this is just so fascinating to me. And I decided that an interesting thing to do would be some neurologist takes volunteers and for 3 minutes flatlines them and wires up their brain to see if the mind separates from the matter, mind separates from the brain. And if there is some indication, then it might indicate that the mind goes someplace in death, which would be an indication that there is an afterlife. And that was the kind of genesis of it. And it was just great fun doing the research. And it turned out pretty good. And the Bradbury quote was, died and gone to heaven. I mean, it was the last. Ray Bradbury gave very few blurbs, very few endorsements in his life, and that was the last of his life.
I'm not sure I can think of another one. Yeah.
What's that?
I said I can't think of another time that I saw him endorse a book. That's
right.
fantastic.
Right. Yeah. And then he passed away, but so it's quite an honor, of course.
Yeah, well deserved. It's a great book. Tess, you of course started this series of books with Zoli and Isle, which later became the television series. 2 female leads at a time when that was, would it be fair to say, not the norm in cop shows or probably anywhere else. Where did these characters come from?
They sprang to life on their own. It's sort of like I started. Again, I started off by hearing Jane Rizzoli's voice, and she was in the first book called The Surgeon. And I introduced Maura Isles in the second book because she was essentially me. I mean, I was just channeling myself as Maura Isles in book 2.
She's a medical examiner, right?
Yeah, so she's a medical examiner. And she's a little bit like me. She's very logical, kind of an introvert. And I did not see this becoming a series. It was more, I wrote about Jane, and let's see what happens next to her, and then let's see what happens to Maura. And then before I knew it, I was in the middle of a series. So a lot of the series had to do with wanting to just see what happens to these women. I want to know, does Jane get happy? Does she get married? Does she ever have her baby? Poor Jane, it took her like 3 books to have her baby. And then it's, Maura, she falls in love with the priest. What happens to that affair? And that takes books and books to resolve that affair. So it's really all about following your girlfriends on the page. That's what it is.
I gotcha. Well, that turned out all right. Gary mentioned that no one knows their audience better than you do, I think he said. So do you have a sense of not just who they are, but why they're reading your books? What are they responding to? What is it they're looking for when they pick up a new Tess Gerritsen?
Well, they're kind of scary, actually, because they tell me how much they love the blood and gore, and they love the mystery. They love to be scared, and they're 80% female. So, I came to this conclusion a long time ago that when we read books, when women read books, who do we identify with? We don't identify with the hero. We don't identify with Jane Rizzoli necessarily. We identify with the victim. The victim is who we put ourselves in their feet. And that's why these books are both scary and somehow they feel triumphant at the end, because the killer is killed by the end or arrested by the end. It's the same thing with children's scary literature. I find that kids are most interested in books in which the potential victims are children. If the victims are adults, kids don't care about that as much anymore. So we really buy books in which we can see ourselves as the victim. And it has something to do with why all these crime novels have women's faces on the covers. It's because the audience is mostly female, and the female audience is looking for a book in which they feel that they can face danger but safely get out of it.
One of the interesting things is that that bookstores don't make a distinction between mysteries and thrillers, and sometimes they're lumped together. The mystery / thriller. But a mystery, as you said earlier, Bill, is problem solving. You're solving a puzzle, and it's kind of driven by logic and rational thinking. A thriller is driven by dread, and it's exactly what is the appeal in Tess's books. The element of dread, something bad is going to happen to somebody, and you can identify with that. And particularly if it's a first person who is the potential victim. I mean, dread is an emotion, and the sense of something horrible about to happen to me is very real and very relatable. So particularly, if you read the headlines in a newspaper, we live in a dreadful filled world. And so that is something that is really the secret of books like Tess's.
Yeah. I neglected to say earlier, so let me say now to anybody who is listening to this live, you are very invited to pose questions to Tess or Gary or both. Just type it into the chat box and we'll forward that along. In the meantime, you both have done a lot of writing. You're both well into the 2-digit numbers. Can you think of any sort of writing lessons you've learned along the way, or maybe something you didn't know when you started, but you figured out probably by doing it or doing it wrong or something like that? Tess, I see you nodding. What did you got?
Well, number one is it never gets easier. It just, I just finished my 30th book and it was just as hard as number 5. What I do find is that it helps to be incredibly curious, to always be paying attention to odd things, odd stories, whether it's true crime or clippings. I mean, I have a folder of tear sheets that I pull out of magazines or newspapers. And I don't always know what I'm going to do with these articles, but eventually they come back to me. And I remember some of my best books actually came out of something that came out in the newspaper. I mean, I read this story out of the Boston Globe in the suburban section about a woman who was found dead in her bathtub. And they put her in a body bag and sent her to the morgue, and she woke up in the body bag.
Wow.
So, I had that tear sheet for a while. I didn't know what to do with it. And then eventually I thought, oh yeah, I remember this. This is a great opening for this book. I also find that sometimes if you get like 2 disparate articles, you put them together and that combination becomes a new plot.
Right. Stronger than either of them by themselves.
Right.
Gary, how about you? Lessons you've learned along the way?
Shorten my narrative. And this
Really?
is something I learned from Tess also, and also over the years have been, developing a more concise style. The earlier books were big, they're long. People don't want to read a 500-page book anymore. 300 pages or so, plus or minus a few, is a comfortable length. And so I learned how to streamline better than I had when I first started. And in fact, there's a special privilege that the first 3 books I wrote, when they went digital, I was given the opportunity to edit my first book. And my first book, I took out 17,000 words. I mean, it was, I was showing off. It was, clunky phrases, too many adjectives, too many adverbs, all this stuff I warned my students not to do. And that was a wonderful turning point. It's like 30 years after I'd written the book, I had this opportunity to clip it down, and it had got that narrative thrust that was kind of lacking in the original form.
Wow. And that is why I will never never even read my early work, much less edit it. Gary, you're still teaching, right?
Yes, yeah.
At that North University, whatever.
At Northeastern University.
Yes.
Yes,
teaching fiction writing and a lot of other literature-based classes, right?
Yes, I teach a course in fiction writing. I have them start a novel, write the first 2 or 3 chapters, and perhaps if they can, an outline, a synopsis. And I teach a course in horror fiction, which is going into its 40th year. And then the other semesters will be either science fiction and writing or modern bestsellers in the writing course. So the constant is the fiction writing, which I absolutely love. And it's small. It's a seminar, 15 students, and you learn a lot about students, you learn a lot about people, and it's a fun course to teach.
Yeah, I think your students learn a lot. Tess, I read that you are breaking into filmmaking. Yes.
Oh yeah, my son and I just finished our second film together. We did a horror film a couple years ago, but this year this film is a documentary, a feature documentary about the origins of the pig taboo. It's, we look into religion and environmentalism, and also the centuries-long relationship between humans and pigs, both good and bad. And it's playing in a couple film festivals this year.
And that's a Magnificent Beast, right?
That's Magnificent Beast.
So film festivals now next week on Netflix next year perhaps.
PBS has taken it on into their library, so it could be on PBS starting in the winter.
That's fantastic. Okay, we've got a couple questions now from people who are watching. This one, I'll do the top one first because it's shorter. This is from Anne. She's asking, how have your readers changed over the years? Tess, I remember your first book was in 1987, I think. That beats me by 4 years. How have your readers changed?
I think readers in general probably have shorter attention spans. They also have more options. There's television.
Yes.
TV has gotten so good, and there's so much to watch on TV. So it's more of a struggle to keep their attention. So I think it's almost as if we have to be more on point in our books.
I have to pass this along, Tess. Someone else watching this, her name's Karen, is suggesting that the films you're doing with your son are his reward for sleeping way back when he was young, so you could write your books.
Well, you know what? My son is wonderful, and he's a delight to work with as a filmmaker. Mother-son things could fall apart and it could be really a disaster, but it is just a privilege to be working with him. He's a great director, he's a great cinematographer, and he's a very good editor. So,
Gary, how about you? How have you seen readers changing over the years?
What I said earlier, I think the attention span is a little shorter. I think they want something a little faster, and so that is I'm aware of that. And I think I picked up more female readers. I think the earlier books are read by guys, and as the demographics have changed, more women buy books than men. In fact, I think 80% of the books that are sold are by females, and so I I learned how to address that particular audience and make the books a little bit slimmer.
I think that's really interesting. As I think I just said, when my first book was in 91, and I remember my publisher saying, you need to do this or that because it's a thriller and most of your readers will be men. I have never found that to be true. I might not go as high as 80, maybe 70%. And that's not just now, that's always. Is New York just not understand who's reading their books? Or
well, there's a funny breakdown with gender. I think men are more male authors are more likely to have a higher proportion of male readers, and women the other way. But what I have discovered is that I have a story to tell. I was on book tour and I was in a Costco or something, and there was a man picking up thrillers. And my media escort said to him, "Why don't you pick up Tess Gerritsen's thriller? She's standing right here and she can sign it for you." And he looked at me and he goes, "I don't buy books by women." And I looked at the books he was holding, and I knew, because of my editorial connections, that he was buying books by female ghostwriters. He just didn't know he was writing. He was buying books by women. They just had men's names on them. So I think that there's one thing I found is that women will cross over and buy books by both genders, but there's a large proportion of men who will not buy books by women.
That's interesting. And it explains, Gary, I know you used to read, probably still do read science fiction, but there was a time when virtually every woman writing in that field adopted some kind of lots of initials or male sounding pseudonym. And I guess this is why.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I think the breakthrough was probably Ursula Le Guin.
Yes.
And she not only had good science fiction, but really smart characterization and great writing style. And she was a terrific writer. But you're right, there was a lot of I'm trying to think of a name. A woman writer and pick up men's names.
James Tiptree for
there
another.
We go, Tiptree. Yes, Alice something or other. Yeah.
Whereas in mystery, of course, at least going back to the golden age, it's, if not dominant, there were many prominent female writers, but maybe not so much in the thriller world. We got another question. This is from somebody watching this on Facebook who says, for both of you basically, what advice would you give an older person who has hobby written for a long time about breaking into print as a new writer today? You're probably thinking like me that you're not a new writer if you've been hobby writing for a long time, but you get what she's saying. She's older. She wants to break into writing. What advice could you give her?
I would say it is never too late. And I can think of a couple of examples of people who hit the bestseller lists with their initial book, their very debut book, in their 80s. Now, I remember there's a book called And the Ladies of the Club. I think she was in her 80s and living in a nursing home when she sold her book, and it became a bestseller. And is it where the crawdads say,
Delia Owens.
Delia Owens, wasn't she 80 or something before, or 70 when she died? That was her first book.
Well, there's also the Lace Maker. I think she was 81 years old. Remember, that was a big bestseller about 8 or 9 years ago, The Lace Maker.
Well, what I love these stories also because I think older people have the benefit of wisdom. They have the benefit of having lived a life, and they have such stories to tell. It's just a matter of being good at your craft, of being able to use your craft to tell these stories in a way that makes the rest of us sink into your story. So age has nothing to do with it. I think it's craft all the way, whether you're young or old. It's just that I think if you're older, you have the benefit of experience.
Right. So age not an issue, but how's she going to break in? Any tips or suggestions you could give?
Well, we both done it the traditional way with agents, but that's not necessary anymore.
Yeah, and also it might be easier just to self-publish because the conventional publisher is looking for someone who's going to have a kind of longevity and write a lot of books, and maybe one a year or so. So all the houses on the waterfront in New York are just flooded with manuscripts coming in. So and you know this very well, Bill, because I'm sure you give advice on this. But self-publishing is nothing too it's still it's quite respectable, and some bestsellers have come out of publishers and self-published people. Yeah.
Well, today, not once upon a time, right? I have heard people I've worked with say, people who have gray hair, as do I, say, I don't want to spend the next 10 years hunting down an agent. So that's how I'm going to, so I'll self-publish or do something like that,
right.
Which I get. People just have to understand what it is they really want, right?
Right, exactly.
I would still make the initial attempt to get an agent, just because I think that self-publishing is a lot of work, and maybe if your book is good enough, you will find that having a publishing house behind you can really take that burden off you and possibly get you a lot more money too.
Here's another question. Somebody, some astute listener has noticed that you both have science backgrounds and want to know if you find your so-called former life interferes with reading, or I'm going to guess writing. What do you think?
I find that my former life enhances the research aspect of what I write. If I'm doing something that's got science in it, I know how to ask questions of experts in various fields of science and just get me from A to B and let me sound like I know what I'm talking about. So I have enough of an acumen of understanding what they're talking about or where to go more deeply into the science, and that works for me. I never once, in the 40 plus years I've been teaching college English, never once ever regretted having a science background. I mean, because I had read science fiction by the pound as a kid, they asked, could I come up with a jazzy new course, as they called it, that would bring non-English majors and taking English electives? And I said, how about science fiction? They all kind of gagged a bit because back then it was, for all the kids who parents put in the closet when company came over, So this is that was, and I never once regretted having that background. It does help.
Well, I think what you may be, go ahead, Tess, you go first.
Yeah, well, first of all, I agree that having a science background makes research a snap. But being a doctor, it does pull me out of a story, I have to admit, when I see something that's, I'll read a book and somebody will mistake a neurologist for a neurosurgeon. And it doesn't, they sound kind of like the same, but they're completely different things. Or a cardiologist with a cardiothoracic surgeon. I see that and I think, oh, this person has no idea what they're talking about. So then it makes you feel like you're not going to trust them for the rest of the story.
Right.
So that does bother me. But then on the other hand, I also read books where the story is so good I can overlook it. But it is a wall that you have to get past if you don't know what you're talking about.
Right. Thank you, Ted. I think that's what our correspondent was actually going for. I abridged the long question, but I think her point was, as much as you know about science, is that a stumbling block when you're reading somebody who hasn't done as much research as maybe they should have?
Okay, yeah, I get that too, yeah.
But that said, even though we are both science backgrounds, we make mistakes. And I make mistakes. And usually they have to do with firearms. So, I'm sure there are people who are like, gun people, and they read our books and they get mad at us for getting caliber wrong or something.
Oh, man. My characters just pull out a gun, period.
Right.
Yeah,
Any more information, that's just going to get me in trouble.
I just use the word weapon. I don't specify what kind of gun it is. Yeah.
What difference does it make? Tess, I think people are going to beat me up if I don't ask you about all the media experience you've had with the television series, and I think you've been involved in that. What's that been like? Let's start with that. What was it like seeing these characters, become an ongoing series that ran for some time?
Well, it was a thrill, even though they didn't look at all like my characters.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. You write this book and you have people you really know, you think you know them, and they show up on TV and all of a sudden they're gorgeous and they're not at all the way you thought they would be. But, it was still a privilege to see them on television. I didn't have anything to do with the show other than having written the books that they're based on. And I got to be on one episode in the last season, which was fun. I was on set for two different episodes. But I had the best job of all with Rizzoli and Isles. I was contracted to be a paid consultant for every episode. They never asked me anything, and I still got.
Sweet. Did you want to be more involved? If they had, would you?
No. Yeah, I had. They were very good. The showrunners were fantastic. They always invited me to go into the writer's room and help them break story. But I had book deadlines at that point, and there was no way I could do anything else but deal with the books.
I get that. Well, with considerable regret, I probably need to wind this down. But before I do, let me both ask, what should we expect next? What's coming next from Tess and Gary? Tess, you want to go?
I just finished my 13th Rizzoli and Isles book. It's called Listen to Me, and it's coming out in June of 2022. And I'm working on another book right now with a new character about spies.
Do you think will there become a point where you're tired of these series characters? I'm talking about Rizzoli and Isles, or are they going to go off forever into the sunset?
I have no plans to send them off into the sunset, but I keep expanding their universe so that this next book is going to focus a lot on Jane's mother, Angela, who's a suburban housewife in Revere, and what did she really see out her window? So that's the focus of that story. Yeah.
Gary, what's next from you?
A book called Served Cold, as in revenge is best served cold. Right. That is the title of a fictional author whose third book is promising to be this big breakout book and get him into bestsellerdom. It is absolutely savaged in the New York Times book review. And the reviewer has his own motives. He is up for tenure at his university and is trying to impress the deans and a tenure committee that he could savage a book and accuse it of dumbing down America. The writer, the author, sees his savaging review, and it sets up a concatenation of more negative reviews. He loses the contract of the next book, destroys his dreams, destroys everything he'd been hoping for, and he goes after the reviewer. And their lives intermingle in a very dark way. So, served cold. Yeah. No publication date yet, though.
Sounds terrific. Well, when it does come out, that'll be the excuse to bring you back onto the podcast, both of you, or bring you to WriterCon, one way or the other. Hey, thank you both so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was fun.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah. Good luck with Splitsville.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Great book.
Thanks. Just a few parting words to everybody watching this podcast. Please don't forget to register for WriterCon, which takes place on Labor Day weekend. That's September 3rd through 6th. Let me also remind you that this podcast is ad-free. We're supported by our patrons. I have that site on the Patreon website. It's Patreon, patreon.com/Wilburn, WILLBERN, where you can support this podcast. And believe me, even if you just contribute a little bit, it makes a huge difference. Please rate or review this show wherever you get podcasts. It makes it easier for new listeners to discover us, and always looking for new writers who might be looking for just the thing they need to launch their writing career to the next level. Until next time, hey sneakers, keep writing. And remember, you cannot fail if you refuse to quit. See you next time.